Yeah. Robert, can we get a cordless mic to pass around? Get some of your feedback. All right, so hands up who read something from the Maccabees, at least the first chapter or two chapters. We have Sister Isaacs, and I know Abigail, and Sister Isaacs is get the mic to Sister Isaacs. Let her just give maybe a highlight or something that she would have learned from from reading that passage.
Now, I found that from listening to that, it fulfilled, at least to me, that the prophecy is in Daniel about them defiling the temple and all of that. That's what I discovered.
Okay.
A vivid description of
right
of that.
Yeah, it's very interesting, right? Abby, you got something too, or you just holding the mic? Okay. So, for those of you who are interested in reading it, if once you have the internet, you can go to BibleGateway.com. All right, a lot of you are familiar with BibleGateway.com. The Good News Translation has it. Okay, the Good News Translation have it. If you try and search for Maccabees under the KJV or NIV, you won't find it. But if Darren can pull it up, I just wanted to read a passage here in Maccabees chapter 1. If he's able to pull up on BibleGateway.com. And it like highlights certain things that you would have read in Daniel or Revelation. And, you know, it kind of makes you feel like some of the stuff in Daniel has been fulfilled, right? And then it also, well, when you read the scriptures in Matthew and Revelation, it seems that there's still something else to come. All right? So let's see if we get up here. All right, so first Maccabees, a Good News Translation. There it is on the screen. Let's go down to verse 20. Where it talks about Antiochus persecutes the Jews. Now, you're saying you go to BibleGateway.com, and it's on your screen here, so Darren is pulling up for us, and it's just chapter 1, verse 20. Chapter 1 gives a nice summary. Oh, I was saying that you could try the Good News translation. I wouldn't say it's the better one, but only some translations has it. So I know the Common English Version has it as well, but there may be other versions out there that has it. Because if you search in Maccabees under the NIV or KJV, you wouldn't find it. It wouldn't come up. You have to search it under a different translation, like the Good News translation or something like that. But there may be other translations. I can't say for certain which one is better than the next. I know I've heard about the Good News translation, but it's good to read, a few translations. But let's look at it. It says, in the year 143, after the conquest of Egypt, Antiochus, now let me ask a question. Antiochus, he was from which empire? He descended from which empire? Is it? Is it? There you go, the Greece. Yes. Yeah. And we're going to get a little into that. But he's spoken of where, you remember the ram and the goat? Right. And then he's believed to be from the goat, and the goat is Greece, right? So it is believed that Alexander the Great of the Greek Empire is the goat, the head horn that came up, but he was what? He was broken off at the height of his power, and he died, and his kingdom was divided into 4. And then eventually Antiochus came up in the ranks, and he was ambitiously wicked toward the Jews, and we're going to talk about him a little bit right here. And it says, in the year 143 after the conquest of Egypt, Antiochus marched with a great army against the land of Israel and the city of Jerusalem. In his arrogance, he entered the temple and took away the gold altar, the lampstand with all its equipment, the table for the bread offered to the Lord, the cups and the bowls and the gold fire pans, the curtain and the crowns. He also stripped all the gold from the front of the temple and carried off the silver and gold and everything else of value, including all the treasures that he could find stored there. Then he took it all to his country. He had also murdered many people and boasted arrogantly about it. There was great mourning everywhere in the land of Israel. Let's skip down to verse 29, and it says, 2 years later, Antiochus sent a large army from I don't even know how to pronounce it, Messia, against the towns of Judea. When the soldiers entered Jerusalem, their commander spoke to the people, offering them terms of peace and completely deceiving them. Remember that terms of peace? Interesting. So he offered them terms of peace, and then he completely deceived them. Then he suddenly launched a fierce attack on the city, dealing it a major blow and killing many of the people. He plundered the city, set it on fire, and tore down its buildings and walls. He and his army took the women and children as prisoners and seized the cattle. Then Antiochus and his forces built high walls and strong towers in the area north of the temple, turning it into a fort. Let's skip down. No, let's continue. They brought in a group of traitorous Jews and installed them there. They also brought in arms and supplies and stored in the fort all the loot that they had taken in Jerusalem. And this fort became a great threat to the city. The fort was a threat to the temple, a constant evil menace for Israel. Innocent people were murdered around the altar. The holy place was defiled by murderers. The people of Jerusalem fled in fear, and the city became a colony of foreigners. Jerusalem was foreign to its own people who had been forced to abandon the city. Her temple was as empty as a wilderness. Her festivals were turned into days of mourning, her Sabbath joy into shame. Her honor became an object of ridicule. Her shame was as great as her former glory, and her pride was turned into deepest mourning. Now this piece should sound familiar to you. Antiochus now issued a decree that all nations in his empire should abandon their own customs and become one people. All the Gentiles and even many of the Israelites submitted to this decree, and they adopted the official pagan religion, offered sacrifices to idols, and no longer observed the Sabbath. The king also sent messengers with a decree to Jerusalem and all the towns of Judea, ordering the people to follow customs that were foreign to the country. He ordered them not to offer burnt offerings, grain offerings, or wine offerings in the temple, and commanded them to treat Sabbaths and festivals as ordinary working days. They were even ordered to defile the temple and holy things in it. They were commanded to build the altars, the pagan altars, temples, and shrines, and to sacrifice pigs and other unclean animals there. They were forbidden to circumcise their sons and were required to make themselves ritually unclean in every way they could, so that they would forget the law which the Lord had given through Moses and would disobey all his commandments. And the penalty for disobeying the king's decree was death. Sounds somewhat familiar? It seems a lot like some of the prophecies issued in Daniel, right? About making them to stop observe their customs, to defile the holy place with a pig, defiling the temple, and persecuting the Jews, and having a peace treaty or a peace coming in peace, but deceiving them. Right? So many believe that this was a type, right, this was a prophecy, this was a fulfillment of, an initial fulfillment of some of the prophecies in Daniel. However, there's scriptural support when Jesus comes, this is after Antiochus, right? Antiochus was in the 2nd century BC, so around 170 something, 160 something around there, where this before Jesus came on the scene. And a lot of this stuff happened to an extent. And when we look at Revelation and further prophecies of Daniel, it would suggest that similar things will happen toward the end time. So, whereas scholars believe that a lot of this stuff has already taken place with the defilement of the temple, they also believe that it will take place again at a greater level. Okay? Now, a lot of that, or scholars believe that that second time was when? 70 AD, after Christ, when Titus and his army, they also desecrated the temple in 70 AD and did all these things again. And could it be the final fulfillment, or is it more fulfillment? And that's the big debate. Is that the final fulfillment of those prophecies, or is there more stuff to come in regards to the defiling of the temple? So, in order for you to be for there to be defilement of the temple, there has to be another temple, right? So there's a lot of debate about whether there needs to be or will be a third temple based on Ezekiel's vision. And if it is, then is there going to be a third final fulfillment of the desolation of the temple and all of this stuff? So that was interesting to read, and I would encourage you to check it out. It's free. It's free on Bible Gateway. I'm not asking you to treat it as scripture, okay? But it's good reading, and many scholars use it as source documents, okay, as historical documents to support that period in there, because, I really didn't know much, and because the Bible doesn't talk about the what they call the intertestamental period between Malachi and Matthew, right? Nobody knows a whole lot if you're just looking at the Bible. So there's other documents that talks about those things that are considered good source documents, that they are reliable, however not considered by the Christian church as canonical or a part of the scriptures. All right? Anything else you may have noticed, for those who may have read it, the first couple chapters, that you want to point out before we go on with some other things? All right, so let's look at some of the things in Daniel. Remember the visions in Daniel? We have Daniel in chapter 2, verses 37 to 43 on the board, on the screen. And remember this statue, this vision that King Nebuchadnezzar had. And he had this vision, and it troubled him. And remember what happened? He wanted to get his wise men to come and not only interpret the dream, but what else? He needed to tell him what the dream is. And it was like, no one can do that. That's impossible. Only the gods can do this. And if you read it, you'll pick up on little certain points. He said, only the gods can do that, but the gods don't dwell with us. Right? Because the gods of Egypt, the gods of Babylon, and all those gods, they were known for one thing: not showing up. They were known for being in their space and not coming to hang with the people. So when you see that God, Yahweh, when he takes on his people, Israel, and he says, guess what? You ain't going to treat me like them other gods. You don't need to make no sacrifices. No idols. Why? Because I am coming myself to dwell with you. So don't make no idols to me. And he had the temple. Why? so he could come like no other Elohim or no other gods that was around. He was making himself different or showing that he was different by showing up. And if you read the first chapter, first two chapters of Daniel, you'll pick up on this little hint where he says, only the gods, and the gods don't hang with us. The gods don't dwell with us like that. All right? So nobody can do this, can tell you what you're thinking. And what was Daniel's response? Daniel said, you're right. Nobody can do that. Only God the Most High can do that. And he has, don't think that I'm special, but he did this so that you, king, would know what the future holds. So Daniel was very, if you notice Daniel was very humble. And he was wise. All right? He didn't try to boast about himself, say, yes, I am the one who God wants to speak to. Don't worry about these other wise men. I like how he was looking out for the other wise people, Peter. Because he's like, nobody could know. So he's like covering them to say, because he says, yeah, they don't know nothing, I'll tell you what it is. Kill all them, Peter, and I got this. You understand? I am Daniel, the oracle of God. Come to me. But no, he said, no, don't kill everyone. He said, no, nobody can do this. So he was like saying, don't fault them. And he said, don't think of me as special. If you read it, don't think of me as special. God the Most High has revealed this through me so that you, king, would know. So that kind of made him feel a little special, right? That shifted it to the king. Boy, Daniel was sharp. He's a sharp, you can see he's a political strategist back then. And then he was made ruler, right? So that was interesting when I looked through Daniel, these little things. Another one that I picked up on Daniel, not related to this per se with the vision, but in Daniel chapter 1, this just jumped out at me. When whoever heard of Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah? See, most of these young people, they ain't know. Now, let me ask you a question. How many of you heard of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? They know about that, right? But they ain't know about no Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael, right? Why? That's their Jewish names, right? That's their Hebrew born names, all right? Now, when they came to be with the king, or when they was brought into his kingdom, right, in his palace, because these were the top-notch people, he brought them in. Why do you think they changed names back then? It was a sign of authority to say, listen, I am in charge. I now change your name, I change your identity. You need to assimilate into my kingdom now. It's like you rebranding, right? Yes, Peter? What book is this? Roots? Roots. Yeah. I thought you was talking about the book of Ruth. I was saying,
No. The movie Roots.
Oh, the movie Roots. Okay.
Like you mentioned, they was trying to assimilate them into different culture.
Now, what was interesting and what came to mind is in Revelation chapter 2 and 3, remember, he says, for those who are victorious, he will brand us a new name. Now, what does that mean? So it's like he's wiping away the shame, the sinfulness, and he's making us like brand new. So it's it's not like how in the Old Testament where the wicked kings or those other kings used to say, I doing this because I trying to rule you, and but he's just using that reference to say, I will make you a new name, and trying to say you will be made brand new. And your old sinful ways or sinful nature will be erased. So no need to be ashamed of anything. Because when we go before a holy God, you know, our sinful nature, us and our sinful nature, will be ashamed, and we cannot face a holy God. And when he comes to you, say, don't worry about that. I'm going to give you a new name. I'm going to rebrand you. I'm going to assimilate into my kingdom of holy people. So that was interesting. That's something I picked up when going through Daniel. So, but there's a lot of stuff in Daniel. Now, let's look at Daniel chapter 2, where we talk about the beast, the image. And then it goes in Daniel chapter 7 and talk about these beasts. And it seems that they are related. It seems that they are talking about the same kingdoms. So in biblical interpretation, when you see visions, certain things kind of been consistent with throughout the Bible, meaning certain things for the most part. Okay? What would a beast represent? What does a beast represent? A power? Yeah, it could be power. More specifically, I would say a kingdom. When you see these beasts, right, it represents a kingdom with power. It includes power and rulership. And then the horns. What do the horns represent? The horns represent authority as well and power, but it represents more specifically leaders. So when you see the horn coming up, right, the big horn represented Alexander the Great, right? When we're talking about the goat, the two horns in the ram represents two leaders. Okay? Now sometimes it could be tricky because they could say the beast represents a king or kingdom, and also the horn represents a king and kingdom. So sometimes they kind of close, but it represents a authority or rulership for the most part. All right? What about heads? Like the beast that had, the one beast that had like 7 heads and 10 horns. What do you think heads may represent? Yeah, it could be different kings or kingdoms within a big kingdom, right? But it talks about generally leadership and rulers and authorities and powers. All right, so we're on the right track here. Now they can't, from reading it, they kind of cross them up a couple of times, but you would get the general. In one verse they say, "Oh, this represents a king," and next verse they say, "Oh, this represents a kingdom," but it's talking about the same thing, and it's most likely the same angel who's talking. So you have to, be flexible and understand the general concept. So it's very clear in the Bible who is the head of gold, right? Who's the head of gold? Say it again. Nebuchadnezzar or Babylon, right? King or kingdom of Babylon. Another king, so it says, this is Daniel saying, you are that head of gold. And he's talking Nebuchadnezzar. Another kingdom will arise inferior to yours. Next, a third kingdom, one of bronze, will rule over the whole earth. And finally, there will be a fourth kingdom strong as iron. Now, as I mentioned last week, there's debate about who the second and third and fourth kingdoms are. This is probably the majority. As you see it here, Babylon, the Medes, and the Persians represent the second kingdom, joint kingdom. And that would seemingly represent visually as well. Like a chess has 2 arms, right? So it's made up of 2. So it doesn't necessarily have to be that, because there's also 2 legs. you know. But when you look at the goat and the ram represented who? There was this ram that had 2 horns, and then the goat came and destroyed the ram. Who was the ram again? The Medes and the Persians, right? And since the ram had 2 horns, it suggests that that's one empire with dual leadership, right? Or one beast. Because some scholars say that the second one is the Medes, and the third one is Persia, and the fourth one is Greece. Whereas it seems like the majority of people, from what I've known over the years, has it Medes and Persians are one, and Greece is the third one, and Rome is the fourth one. Now, some people have Rome coming out of Greece. So it's debate. It's not a foregone conclusion in the scholarly world where this imagery here, okay? So if you hear it, then you'll know why. All right? So let's see if anything else on here. All right, let's go to the next one. This is Daniel 7. And it talks about Daniel had this other vision. And it says, in my vision I saw, and there was before me 4 winds of heaven. Remember the 4 winds in Revelation? 4 winds of heaven churning up the great sea, and 4 great beasts, each different from the others, came up out of the sea. And the first is like a what? We have lion, and then the next one, the second, which was like a bear, and the third was like a leopard, and the fourth was just like this terrible beast. Terrifying and frightening and very powerful, not large iron teeth. You see, so the iron teeth and the iron legs seem to go together, right? And then everything else, the head of the lion. So it seems to be talking about the same thing. You know, generally there's a concept in Scripture about witnessing, to bear two or three witness. So God never just sends one message without sending another one to confirm it. All right? So, just talking about bearing witness. All right? So, in life, you know, you should use that principle when you're studying the Scripture. If you see a principle in one place, see if you find it somewhere else. If you don't see it anywhere else in Scripture, check to see if really that's the correct interpretation. All right. Now, what was interesting, let's go to Hosea. I can tell you right now. Look for Hosea, chapters 13. Just chapter 13, and let's go to verse 8. 7 and 8. Thinking of those animal creatures, listen to what Hosea, he's warning the children of Israel, and it says, so I am to them like a lion, like a leopard. I will lurk beside the way. I will fall upon them like a bear robbed of her cubs. I will tear open their breasts, and there I will devour them like a lion, as a wild beast would rip them up. You see the similar imaging here, where God is talking and warning Israel how he's going to be like a lion to them, how he's going to be like a bear, how he's going to be like a leopard, and then a wild beast. Could this be a reference to the 4 kingdoms that he put in place to deal or punish Israel? Is it coincidence? Or is God prophesying to his people how his punishment would be expressed through these kingdoms? Now you'll see in Daniel 7, it talks about 10 horns. And also in Revelation, you'll see that. How many of you have seen that? It talks about 10 horns and 7 heads. Well, it talks 7 heads in Revelation, but in Daniel it only talks about the 10 horns. And let's read this passage here. When Daniel saw this vision, right? He was asking about it, and the angel just told him these are four kingdoms, but he was especially concerned about the fourth one. Okay? And he says, I also wanted to know about the 10 horns. Let's go back. The 4 great beasts are 4 kings. This is the interpretation, okay? The 4 great beasts are 4 kings, or you'll see later on it says kingdoms. So king or kingdoms that will rise from the earth. But the holy people of the Most High will receive the kingdom and possess it forever. Yes, forever and ever. So what is he saying there? What is he trying to say? In the midst of him saying God is going to allow these kingdoms to dominate and to punish Israel, there's still hope. You'll see that at the end it says, but the holy people of the Most High will receive the kingdom and will possess it forever. So in the spite of persecution or the spite of punishment on the Israelites, God is still giving them hope, saying you will still possess the kingdom at the end. All right? And he said, then I wanted to know the meaning of the 4th beast. Because clearly this 4th beast was one that left an impact in Daniel's mind. And it says, then I wanted to know the meaning of the 4th beast, which was different from all the others and most terrifying, with his iron teeth and bronze claws. The beast that crushed and devoured his victims and trampled underfoot whatever was left. I also wanted to know about the 10 horns on his head, and about the other horn that came up before, which 3 of them fell. The horn that looked more imposing than the others, and that had eyes and a mouth that spoke boastfully. As I watched, this horn was waging war against the holy people and defeating them, until the Ancient of Days came and pronounced judgment in favor of the holy people of the Most High. And the time came when they possessed the kingdom. He gave this explanation. The 4th beast is a 4th kingdom. So you see in verse 17 it says the 4 great beasts are 4 kings. But now he's saying in 23 the 4th beast is the 4th kingdom. So it can also, king or kingdom is kind of expressed by the same thing here, a beast. And it says it will be different from all the other kingdoms and will devour the whole earth, trampling it down and crushing it. The 10 horns are 10 kings who will come from this kingdom. So remember we talked about the horns. They represent 10 kings who will come from this kingdom. Now, some scholars, why they believe this is Greece, is because they have 10 kings or kingdoms that they say are descendant from Greece. While other scholars say, well, this is more future, 10 kings coming from the Roman Empire. After them, another king will arise, different from the earlier ones, and he will subdue 3 kings. He will speak against the Most High and oppress his people and try to change the set times and the laws. The holy people will be delivered into his hands for a time, times, and a half times. Remember that? So is this talking about Antiochus? If it's talking, some people, if they believe that this is talking about Antiochus the 4th, and Greece has to be the 4th kingdom. Because Antiochus came from the Greek Empire. Now, if this is something talking about later on in the future, then it could come from the Roman Empire, and who you have most likely Titus, right? Or someone in the Nero around that time. But he will subdue 3 kings. So it seems like this particular one, he would take authority from 3 other kings that currently are there. He will speak against the Most High, so he will speak blasphemous words, and he will speak evil about God and his people and try to change the set times and laws. Now, when we When we read Maccabees, didn't they try to do that? Change the laws and the set times? Right? They did do that. Right. So in a way, this was fulfilled in a way by Antiochus. And if that's the case, then that means Greece would be the fourth empire. And Rome would be a later empire, or really a branch off from Greece. The other view is that this is Rome, and maybe related to the Roman persecution of the Christians. Okay? And then another view is that is speaking of the future, the end times. Right? This is one commentator. He said the 10 kings, at least on this point, the text makes it clear that the 10 horns represent 10 kingdoms or kings. The 10 kingdoms that spring from Alexander's empire are, and it's listed there. Okay? So those are 10 kingdoms that came from Alexander's empire. So clearly this is someone who believes that the fourth empire is Greece. All right? Yet others believe that the 10 are successors to the Roman Empire and as such may still be future. Yeah, like now. Yeah. This is another comment. Bible scholar says, another little horn, which is the descriptive title, is derogatory. The close recounting of the deeds of Antiochus IV throughout the remaining visions suggests that the little horn likely refers to him. However, if Rome is the fourth beast, this horn may alternately represent the Antichrist. In verse 21, he says, this horn made war with the holy ones represents the persecution of the Antiochus. And, of course, if it's the other alternative would be the Antichrist. Now, in verse 10, this scholar says, 10 kings will arise. These may be 10 Seleucid rulers, while 7 of easily identifiable, the other 3 are unknown. And he says the number 10 may also be a number which is a common feature in apocalyptic literature. For those who believe the beast is Rome, the 10 horns may represent a 10-nation confederation, that 7-year tribulation period preceding Christ's return. So these are the different views regarding it. So there's no real there's consensus in different camps, but there's no foregone conclusion of who these kingdoms are because they can't determine who exactly these represent. And this is another one. This is another scholar says, the 10 horns are interpreted to be 10 kings who will emanate from the fourth kingdom, Rome. So he obviously believes Rome is the fourth kingdom. Since the Lord's return puts an end to the rule of these horns, the 10 kings must reign at the present. Because it suggested that the Lord himself will put an end to it, but that doesn't necessarily he's going to come and put an end to it. Because it said the same thing about Antiochus. Say they reign contemporaneously as one empire since all exist together. And this fact is expressly stated in Revelation 17. Daniel was predicting that out of the old Roman Empire will arise 10 kings or kingdoms that will constitute a new phase of that empire at the end of the age. The little horn, previously identified as a person, is now interpreted as a king of the last days. So they take the little horn, representing someone in the last days, rather than Antiochus. He is called in Scripture, among other names, the man of lawlessness, the Antichrist, and the beast. Suggest what? Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of overlap, okay, where it does clearly point to Antiochus in the second century BC, but also some of it seemed to point to 70 AD, and then some of it point to stuff that may still come to pass. So when we look at it, there's a few differences, and that may help us understand what time period is looking at. Now, when we look at just comparing, we have like 5-6 more minutes. When we look at Daniel 7 and we compare a little bit to Revelation 12, because we stopped at Revelation 12 last week, we see Revelation 12 verse 3 says, "And another sign appeared in heaven, behold, a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns on his head." Remember this? Now, although 7 crowns are really not mentioned in Daniel, I didn't see it, the 10 horns are mentioned and represented in Revelation. It also represents 10 kings. Now, 7 crowns on his head. Now, did you know that Rome was considered the city on 7 hills? And whereas they even had a festival called the Festival of 7 Mountains. So Rome was considered the city of 7 hills or on 7 mountains. So a lot of people think that the 7 crowns represents Rome. So they're kind of tying Daniel into Revelation and thinking that Rome is the 4th kingdom. And it goes on to say, the woman fled into the wilderness to a place prepared for her by God, where she might be taken care of for 1260 days. The woman was given the 2 wings of a great eagle so that she might fly to the place prepared for her in the wilderness, where she would be taken care of for what? A time, times and a half a time, out of the serpent's reach. Now, when we look at the Daniel passage, it says, talking about this king, it says, this king or this horn will speak against the Most High and oppress his holy people and change the set times and the laws, like Antiochus did. But it may also be referring to this same person in Revelation, and it says the holy people will be delivered into his hand for a time, times and a half a time. Does this say the same thing as Revelation? It says the holy people will be delivered into his hand for a time, times and a half, but Revelation says, right, you'll be taken care of for a time, times and a half, out of serpent's reach. Do you interpret this as the same thing or a little different? It seems a little different, right? It seems like the holy people are talking about this one in Daniel 7. It talks about the holy people being delivered into the hand of this particular king. Whereas in Revelation, it seems that God is, although they may be in the presence, they are taking care of them and preparing them and making provisions. And it's kind of like out of the serpent's reach. Although you may be in the midst, you're out of their reach. So it seems a little different here. Could this be talking about, in Daniel, or talking about something that's happened already, and Revelation talking about something in the future where we will be protected and kept? Right? Or if it's talking about the 1st century persecution, then we know that the people were killed. Many of the Christians were killed and slaughtered. So if it is talking about that, then the out of the serpent's reach may not necessarily mean that he can't affect them. Or it could just mean that the church as a whole would be preserved, but many would be killed. And we know under persecution, the church grew. So though many Christians were killed, the church grew. So maybe it's talking about that. When we go on to Revelations 13, it says, the dragon stood on the shore of the sea, and I saw a beast coming out of the sea. It had 10 horns and 7 heads, with 10 crowns on his horns. And on each head a blasphemous name. The beast I saw resembled a leopard, but had feet like those of a bear, and a mouth like that of a lion. Now remember, in Daniel's dream, what was going on? These were 4 separate kingdoms, right? Or 3 kingdoms, and then there's three animals or beasts, and then this 4th one that's just like crazy. Now this one here, it talks about the beast resembled a mixture of all the first 3. So perhaps this is talking about the 4th. So it has a head like a lion, and has feet like a bear, and it resembles a leopard. So it's like a combination of all 3 of them. Could it be all this and this last beast? You see? So although there's resemblance to Daniel, it seems to be different, right? So could it be that this one here represents that 4th? He's giving more clarity in this 4th beast, the one, the terrifying, where he's saying it's like all 3 of them put together. And when we go into Revelation 17, there's a lot about this as well. It says, "Then the angel carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness. There I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was covered with blasphemous names and 7 heads and 10 horns." So we see this in Revelation. We see this repeated with 7 heads and 10 horns, right? But in Daniel, it doesn't talk about 7 heads. Now, some people say, hey, it was 10, and then remember, 1 came to conquer the 3. So, but to me, that's still 8, right? If you say 10 minus 3 plus the 1, or it could be 1 that came from the past took over the 3. And we're going to get a little more into that in Revelation chapter 17. But our time is up. It's 10:46, so we have some donuts and refreshments next door. So we're going to take a break before the next service. Young people, we want you to come back here. We're going to join all together in the first. I think we have a singing the anthem and stuff, right? So we're all also going to join together and do that, and then we're going to go upstairs. All right, young people? But feel free to go quickly and get a donut and some coffee.